Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Maximum Downforce, episode 18 of the official Downforce Radio Formula One podcast. Joining me, as always, Maciej, Hamera, Merisse Baker, and Topher Smith. Guys, the Mexican Grand Prix, or the Mexico City Grand Prix, should I say, with Formula One renaming it for some apparent reason, it was a good race weekend in terms of the storylines that we saw. Quite literally maximum downforce for the cars, but Topher, unfortunately, the fact that there was so much downforce on these cars with the high altitude of the circuit, the racing wasn't as good as we hoped it would have been.
Yeah, I've got to be honest with you, Will. It wasn't the best ever Mexican Grand Prix we've ever seen, or Mexico City Grand Prix. Yeah, again, to your point, Will, I don't get why there was that name change there. But anyway, it wasn't the most classic Mexico race we've ever seen in Formula One. I don't think it was a bad race. There was still the elements of it where we were kept on the edge of our seats, such as Sergio Perez trying to chase down Lewis Hamilton for second place. But when you do have a high downforce setup on all of the cars like that, it can become a little bit follow the leader at times. And I think it's just one of those ones where it was simply that. It was just a bit more of a follow the leader race.
Merisse, coming into the Mexico City Grand Prix, I think we can all happily say that all of the attention was on one man, Sergio Perez, another home Grand Prix for him. And realistically, would you say it was a good performance for him in general?
Say so. I think qualifying was disappointing for them. And I think we sort of see Perez as a race man. He's never been really up there in qualifying, but I think he still did the job being P4. And then obviously in the race he had loads and loads of pace. Obviously the Red Bull was a fast car, but I think his aim was always to get on that podium. We don't know how it would have turned out if, Bottas hadn't have spun at the start and that incident didn't happen. But I think he should be pleased with how it went, because getting a podium and a double podium for Red Bull was probably what they hoped for and the maximum they could have got after their Saturday.
Now, Maciej, the title race is really starting to come down to the wire now. Obviously, Max Verstappen leads the World Championship now by 19 points. Speaking yourself as someone who has won a championship, the Super 1 Championship in 2019, do you think coming into the weekend the pressure really would have been on Verstappen to perform here, or do you think he just treated it as a race as usual?
To be honest, I think he thought that the Red Bull was going to be strong. I think the real pressure kicked in after qualifying, because third place is not where he wanted to be, especially with all the dirty air due to the downforce the cars were running at Mexico. So really that start that Verstappen had, that was really key to take a lot of the pressure off him. Because I think if he had to dice with Hamilton those early laps, it could have really come to something not too pleasant. So I think definitely he felt the pressure after qualifying. But from then on, he could, control the pace as on his own and really manage his tires to victory. So, yeah, I think generally the pressure ramped up during the weekend for sure.
Now, before we start reviewing the race itself, I just want to take a particular note of qualifying. Because Red Bull through Q1 and Q2 looked to be the dominant force within the session. They looked like they were on the pace, although obviously Bottas and Leclerc topped Q1. Verstappen topped Q2 just by a small fraction to Lewis Hamilton. And then Q3, Mercedes were able to top qualifying, but after the race especially, Hamilton said that he doesn't believe that there was any difference in pace. He just thinks Red Bull had quite a poor session right at the end. And I put this in the headline that we published, Topher. Q3 crumbled for Red Bull because there was almost this inter-team squabble between themselves and Yuki Tsunoda. Christian Horner coming out saying that both drivers were quote-unquote Tsunoda'd. Verstappen calling either Perez or Tsunoda, more likely Tsunoda, so stupid, essentially labelling him as an idiot. And frankly, I think this is the first place I want to start, because immediately I messaged you wondering why Tsunoda was out there in Q3. And I think I have to retract that statement and apologise to Tsunoda, because quite frankly, I think the way Red Bull treated one of their junior drivers was absolutely disgusting.
It wasn't really the best image, was it? But I think it was kind of fair asking why Tsunoda was out in Q3 in the first place, because he had to take his grid penalties. And usually when the driver has grid penalties, they'll go out and do Q1, effectively just to get within the 107% rule that's in Formula One. And then they'll call that for qualifying. They'll save the engine, they'll save the tyres. With Tsunoda taking on his grid penalty, why was he even bothering to go out in Q2, let alone Q3? When it came to the incident between himself, Max, and Sergio, it was a little bit of a kerfuffle that did ultimately cost all three drivers, but I'm not going to go ahead and proportion blame on anyone particular, because simply these things happen when you have high-speed circuits like this. Someone's going to get it wrong, and if you got drivers on the same section of the track, it will affect them as well. And Max going ahead and saying that they're an idiot or whatever it was he said, that's just a heat of the moment comment. I'm not sure if he would have known straight away whether it was Yuki who had gone off in the first place. He will have known it was Sergio because he was the one that he was following, but Yuki in the first place, I don't know if he would have known. So, yeah, to me, that's just a heat of the moment comment. Regarding what Christian Horner was saying afterwards, that they effectively got Tsunoda'd, I mean, that comment actually took me a lot by surprise. Because if it had been any other driver on the grid, someone who's not within the Red Bull family, then you can sort of understand those comments coming from Christian Horner. But when it's about one of his own, someone who's in the Red Bull family and someone who's not directly, like Christian Horner's not directly a boss of Yuki Tsunoda, but they're still within the same company. Having a comment like that coming from him, I was very surprised to hear that, thinking, wow, he's just said that about his own driver, basically. And I mean, I don't know what they've done to sort that out since. I imagine they will have had a sit down and said, like, you know, this happened, this is why it can't happen, this is how we can improve, and so on and so on. I think at the end of the day, it just comes down to heat of the moment, and what they have to do now is just make sure that it doesn't happen again.
On the contrary to what we just said negatively about Red Bull Merisse, the weekend after qualifying, it couldn't have gone better for Max Verstappen. A dominant performance for the Dutchman, which, as I mentioned earlier, puts him 19 points ahead of the championship. Would you say this is possibly his best performance this season, dominantly leading almost the entirety of the race, other than what his teammate led during the pit stop phase? And realistically, after lap 1, he never looked back.
I would say, in terms of a whole weekend, it was quite dominant, because even after qualifying, he still showed that he has that determination to come back and, you know, turn it over and have an amazing race. And it didn't put him down. He didn't think, I can't get past them. And I think, in a way, with the Red Bulls qualifying P3 and 4, it actually gave them a bit of an advantage, because they were able to get, well, Max was able to get the slipstream and overtake both Mercedes. And in a way, you think Red Bull must have some sort of playing mind games with Mercedes, because surely they would have thought, we need to cover off Max. And Bottas and Hamilton didn't seem to do that. So I think Max is playing on their mind, and the fact that he was able to take the lead and then no pressure was put on him at all. It was, you know, a massive gap. And normally you'd have, you know, Verstappen and Hamilton at the front fighting, and they'd be miles ahead. Like in the US, we saw that Perez was, you know, tens of seconds behind, but Perez was on Hamilton's tail, which shows you that the Red Bulls were fast this weekend. But I think this was one of Max's amazing races, because he had no competition at all. I didn't see him make any mistake in the race. And, you know, as usual, Red Bull had great pit stops. So I think it's races like these where Saturday doesn't go his way, but he still redeems himself. He comes back fighting. I think that proves that he can be dominant, and this is why, you know, he's the lead driver at Red Bull.
On the other side of the garage, Maciej, it might even be a result which is remembered more by the fans, because this is Sergio Perez's first ever podium in front of his home crowd. And historically, and quite frankly, this not surprising, but almost weird, the first time a Mexican driver has ever led a lap in their country or scored a podium.
Yeah, I think it was a great result for Perez. Of course, I think he's still, maybe he didn't show it, but I think he's still a little bit disappointed that he didn't get that second place. because he could see what the car was capable of doing. I mean, Verstappen just strolled away with the win when he was out in front. So I think he was a little bit disappointed with how that went. But in terms of the fans, they get to see what is one of their premier and sports people, stand on the podium. I think that's great. Perez, everyone's always said what kind of talent he has, and it's nice for him to finally exhibit that in a proper front-running car. And these are one of the benefits that comes with having a front-running car, that at his home race he can challenge for a podium.
So for Verstappen's championship rival Lewis Hamilton, although he took second in qualifying and eventually second in the race, you'll notice in the podcast plan that we've mapped out here, the question I'm going to ask you, and it's quite surprising given the closeness of this title, but is this championship fight over for Lewis Hamilton? There's 19 points in it. There's still, I think, 108 points remaining to be taken. Something somewhere along those lines, 107 maybe. And yet, I can't help shake this feeling that Verstappen has almost got this title on lockdown.
It's the age-old question of, is this title over? And any racing driver will tell you that it's too early, it's not over until the checker flag falls in Abu Dhabi. But I think I do have to agree with you, Will. You sort of got that impression after the checkered flag in Mexico that Max Verstappen just put one hand on his first ever Formula One title, his first ever single-seater title, for that matter. And yeah, I kind of got that feeling after the race that this is Max Verstappen laying down his authority and saying this title is going to be mine this year. And next time out, we head to Interlagos, which, as we all know, is another Red Bull track in quotation marks. And everyone was saying that Mexico City would be a Red Bull track. And while ultimately it was, they got to 1-3 in the race, Mercedes did bring the challenge to them in qualifying. We had Bottas on pole, Hamilton in second, and we're thinking, oh, maybe it's not going to be quite the walkover for Red Bull in Mexico City. But who's to say that we might not see more of the same at Interlagos? Everyone is expecting Red Bull to be quick there again. But such is the similarity between Red Bull and Mercedes now, in terms of the performance of their packages. It's so difficult to predict and to know who is going to come out on top. I've said from the start of the season, I think that Max Verstappen is going to win the title this year. While Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes have put up an immense challenge towards that, they've been exchanging the lead of the championships throughout the entire season. I still don't see any reason to change my mind on that. I still think this is going to be Verstappen's year. And whether the title is now over or not, we've got 4 races to decide that.
Merisse, Topher just said about Mercedes taking the fight to Red Bull in qualifying especially. But ultimately, Valtteri Bottas's race was practically ruined before it even started. He was punted by Daniel Ricciardo. The Australian actually apologised after the race had finished. And it's, in my opinion, it's clear to see why. Frankly, I don't understand why the stewards did not investigate it, because the way I look at it, Ricciardo locked up into the corner, continued going, took a bit too much speed into it, and ended up in the back of Bottas. It really ruined the Finns' race, and ultimately Ricciardo's as well. But you just have to take a look at it. One could have been fighting for the podium positions, and the other just trying to get a points finish.
I think at the end of the day, I think the stewards look at incidents like that as, oh, it's a lap 1 incident, and it's hard when all those cars are going into turn 1. But the biggest thing, and me and like a lot of people I know discuss this, is where the stewards often look at incidents and they think about the consequences instead of the incident that's actually happened. So, Max and, for example, Lewis and Max could have an incident and it could be the same as, Tsunoda and Mick at the back. But because it's to do with the 2 championship contenders, they may think about the outcome differently than a different set of drivers because of the consequences on the championship. So sometimes I think it's a bit unfair and they don't carry across their judgment. So I think because it was the pole sitter, it was, a massive deal. But I think the incident itself is just one of those things into turn 1. Anyone could have locked up. But then again, someone as experienced as Ricciardo should probably not be doing that. And it is very sad to see Valtteri spin out, because we know he's only got a few races left. We all want him to do well. You know, we're siding with him. But I think, personally, it's a bit of a hard one to judge on because it's so hectic into that first corner. But it did take Bottas basically out of contention completely, and Ricciardo didn't get points. But you sort of have to look at it as if there's not drivers in those cars. It's just anonymous sort of people, and you have to think about not the consequences, but the actual incident, if that makes sense.
Maciej, after Bottas's punt, he was spun to the back of the grid, and ultimately Mercedes opted to use him to attempt to try and take the fastest lap away from Max Verstappen, who just cruised off into the distance and was easily able to take it in the second half of the race. Bottas, however, came out, overtook Verstappen under blue flags, then was re-overtaken by Verstappen, and then was brought in for another pit stop. Ultimately, he took it on the final lap. It was quite bizarre, to be honest. It was a fastest lap farce.
To be honest, I agree, Will. I mean, they've introduced this fastest lap rule to try and, to spice up the action. And I think now we're starting to see this. I think it's starting to reach the point where it's actually becoming quite petty. Just teams, the moment a driver isn't quite where he should be, he's 13th, they're just trying to get 1 point off the other team. We saw this with Perez at Silverstone, where he was actually climbing back up the field after an incident, I think with Raikkonen, and he was actually, I think, 12th or something around the point, and they pitted him to try and get the fastest lap off of Lewis. And it's just, I don't think this is the right look for Formula One. To have drivers, I mean, surely the driver leading the race should be going for the fastest lap regardless. But of course they can't do that because the tires are so wear dependent that they can't do that on no matter what fuel load. So, they're boxing the driver who has the least to lose to just try and not even gain a point, but just take points away from their rivals. And I don't think it's a good look, to be honest. It's, you've got, and it's confusing for new fans as well, they see a driver gets a point for the fastest lap of the race, but the driver with the fastest lap is down in P15, and he actually ultimately doesn't get a point. It's a bit confusing in that respect as well. So I don't think this is really working. I think the rules either need to be adjusted at the end of the year or just dropped altogether.
One thing I'd like to quickly interject at this point is that we had a similar sort of situation in Formula E in its earlier seasons, where there were points on offer for taking the fastest lap, and we had a number of Prix where a driver would be involved in a collision at the first corner, make their way back to the pits and get into their second car. This was like back in the day of car swaps in Formula E. But then they get into their second car, set it to qualifying spec, and then go out and try to take the fastest lap to still set a point. And I'm sure you will remember the finale of Season 2 when we had this fastest lap shootout for the title between Lucas Di Grassi and Sebastian Buemi. Like, that's a whole other story there. But Formula E responded to the fact that these drivers who were involved in incidents on the first lap then taking the fastest lap later on in the race by having a qualifying spec car. They changed the rule so that you could only score the fastest lap points if you were within the top 10. I wonder if it's worth introducing a similar sort of rule adaptation to Formula One. We now have the fastest lap points in place, but maybe only take it if you are within the top 10. We do still have some situations where a driver who is within the top 10, such as Lewis Hamilton, for example, they'll come in and pit a couple of laps on the end to go onto the soft tyres, then go for fastest lap at the end. I think it was in Zandvoort that we saw that, if I remember correctly, because Max was going to win that race anyway. But by that point, Lewis had already built up enough of a gap to the driver in third place to be able to make that move to come in and pit for fresh tyres and then go and get the fastest lap. I think personally, if they were to change it to only getting the fastest lap points if you're in the top 10, I think that would be a good move for Formula One. But then with drivers who are already within the top 10 coming in and pitting to put on soft tyres at the end, I think if you've done well enough during the race to build up that much of a gap where you can get a free pit stop like that, by all means, have a go for it.
Unfortunately, Topher, that's actually the rule currently in Formula One at the moment, that only a person within the top 10 can take the point for the fastest lap. It was just Bottas was trying to deny Verstappen.
But what about this for an idea? What about that the fastest lap of the drivers within the top 10 gets the point? That could work.
That's sort of what I was getting at.
I see what you mean now. Sorry.
Yeah, I probably just worded that probably not as well as I could have, but yeah, what Maciej said just then, that's more or less what I was getting at.
So mimic the exact Formula E rule.
Maybe not exact as in just copy what Formula E does, but I think an adaptation of Formula One's fastest lap rule could probably be welcome.
Just a quick statistic for you guys: that if the Formula One fastest lap point had been awarded in 2008, Felipe Massa would actually be the 2008 Formula One world champion. I think it's a bit odd that such a championship, or essentially Lewis Hamilton's first Formula One career, would it really, Topher, just sort of diverting away from the topic for a bit, would you think that would be fair if the championship was decided by fastest lap?
I don't think it's a question of whether it's fair or not. It's within the regulations, and it's the same for all of the drivers. When you take it into a historical viewpoint, there are some instances where it might be affected. But me and Chris Cavaney of Downforce Radio, me and him recently put together a whole bunch of spreadsheets regarding what would happen if this season had this point system. And there were a few changes within that. And I think another example, if I remember correctly, I think Eddie Irvine would have been the 1999 world champion had it been for fastest lap points. And it's all very well and good saying that, historically this could change, this could have been different. But it is what it is from season to season. And Massa in 2008, I think he would have been a deserving champion. But as it was, there weren't any points for fastest lap. And Lewis Hamilton prevailed with his famous last corner pass on Timo is that Glock. So, yeah, it's an interesting question, no doubt, and it's one that is fun to talk about, but it is what it is. It's the same for all the drivers as it stands at the moment.
Well, Merisse, it might have seemed a bit odd to remove Bottas from his race to try and maybe snag a point. Obviously, he probably wouldn't have, but either way, it's actually prevented Red Bull Racing from overtaking Mercedes in the championship, because if you take a look at the results, Red Bull would have been equal on Mercedes, and I believe they would have overtaken the Silver Arrows on countback.
I think the fastest lap is one of those things that, because I feel like it's always Mercedes and Red Bull who will go for that, because they're the teams that, they can build that gap. They're the only teams that can do it, and no other team will really have a big enough of a gap to sacrifice to be able to take it. So it's always going to be crucial in the constructors. And you can look back on it, and if it ends with 1 point either way, you can say, oh, it could be down to a fastest lap, and people won't like that. But I do think it's not like the teams don't know. The teams knew it was a rule coming in, and they obviously, change and alter their strategy according to that rule. And because Bottas was out of the race, he was not getting any points. It was his best option was to obviously pit and take it away from Max, and that has benefited them by a single point. And it was the most Bottas can do. So in situations like that, where Bottas might think, "Oh, can't help the team in any way," rules like that make it so that he can still have an impact on the championship, even when he's not, scoring any actual points. He can still steal it away, which I think is still a great aspect of the strategy in the race, because you've still got this extra point that's available that all the teams can go for. But I do think it's something that's just sort of a Mercedes and Red Bull thing, unless obviously you have junior teams getting involved to steal it away from Mercedes or Red Bull. But yeah, I think it was Bottas taking it away from Max is obviously something Mercedes thought about, and in the championship it may be crucial, so you never know.
Just quickly, I just thought it was interesting there what Merisse just said, that it's going to be mostly Mercedes and Red Bull who take the fastest lap points this season. I've just quickly looked it up while she was finishing her point there. And out of the 18 races we've had so far, Will, I'm going to direct this to you actually, Will. I know that you like to give us our trivia questions from time to time. I'm going to put this one to you, Will. Out of the 18 rounds we've had so far in 2021, there have been 3 instances, technically 4, but 3 instances where a non-Mercedes or Red Bull driver has taken the fastest lap. Can you name those instances?
I assume Ricciardo had it in Monza.
Yep, that's one.
Norris in Russia, maybe? He was pretty dominant around there.
Yep, that's 2.
Um,
And there's another one, technically 2.
I'll have a go, Will. I think I know one of them.
Yeah, go on, Magic.
I think Pierre Gasly had one as well, didn't he?
He did, yes. That was at Budapest. And can you guys remember why I said that there was technically 4?
Not particularly.
Are you counting Spa, perhaps?
I might be counting Spa.
Oh, Mazepin.
There we go.
Oh yeah.
I mean, not officially recognised, but Nikita Mazepin did have the fastest lap at Spa.
I think you've put me on the spot there, Topher. I know. I don't think I personally would have thought Ocon would have had the fastest lap in Budapest, or at least Hamilton, because Hamilton was charging through for a few.
No,
laps.
it was Gasly.
That's quite bizarre.
Hmm.
Well, I think that's perfectly leads us on to the next point. I think we'll bring this forward a bit then. Pierre Gasly, Maciej. Actually, I'll direct this to all 3 of you because I feel this is a topic which needs to be addressed almost. If we start with Maciej, go to Merisse, and then end with Topher. Pierre Gasly is almost the unsung hero of possibly even this season, especially the Mexico Grand Prix. He took P4 in an AlphaTauri ahead of both Ferraris, and realistically, he was never really challenged by them, Maciej.
Yeah, it was another fine drive by Gasly, in my personal opinion. I think he's really, especially, I mean, last season he had some great performances as well, but this season in particular, he's really been raising the bar. It just goes to show how much more comfortable he's feeling in AlphaTauri than in that dreadful half season in Red Bull. But to be honest, that's a lot of drivers struggle with that, not because of the car or anything in particular, but the Red Bull climate can be very difficult for a driver which isn't automatically considered the number 1 driver. I mean, I'm not by all accounts saying that Pierre, during his time at Red Bull, was getting, old front wings and, he had second development parts, even though that probably was happening. He was probably getting them slightly later than Verstappen was. But it's also the mentality of the team, the mechanics, the engineers, how they work with you, they're going to be less inclined to go that extra bit further to, get that, half a tenth for you than compared to what they consider as the number 1 driver, even though it's not written down on paper anywhere. So I think, if we compare it to a small story that Mark Webber had when Sebastian Vettel was driving for Red Bull, they actually told Vettel when Webber beat him at Monaco one year that he had a cracked chassis. And Christian Horner actually went up to Mark Webber and said that actually wasn't the case. They're just telling that to Vettel to essentially make himself feel better. That just gives you an insight of the kind of psychology that goes behind Red Bull in keeping their star drivers. Christian Horner also came out saying how Gasly, he was constantly comparing himself to Verstappen in that half year, constantly looking at the data. Now Gasly doesn't really have anybody to compare himself to at AlphaTauri. So, he's probably driving a little bit more by feel and not really looking into the data too much. He probably still is, comparing it against himself, of course, where he can improve compared to his previous best efforts. I think that he's generally just more relaxed now at AlphaTauri, and he's kind of taking things his own way at his own pace. He's not constantly trying to keep up with what his teammate is doing at the other side of the garage. And it's clearly showing in the results. It was just another perfect drive. The AlphaTauri is not, a top 3 car. I don't think the AlphaTauri is as good as the Ferrari or the McLaren, personally. But Gasly just gets his head down and really works for it. And clearly, it's, he's been piecing it together every weekend. And, especially now in the second half of the season, he's been coming out on top more often than not.
Ferris, how would you rate his performance in Mexico?
Yeah, I would say, amazing. I think I barely saw him in the race. I don't think he was shown once. It was quite late in the day, so I might have just fallen asleep. But yeah, he's been doing amazingly, and it's not even in the race. Qualified P5 as well, and he's had a couple of these races. Baku, he got a podium. Zandvoort, I think he was 4th as well, and he's had an amazing run of races. And it is, like Maciej said, it's him being able to gel with the car and the team as well to be so fast. It's hard for him to have a comparison because we don't know whether, he's outperforming the car or Yuki is just, underperforming in the car a lot. But he's getting the results that team need, and I think they're level with Alpine now on points in the constructors. So he's doing everything he needs to do to prove he deserves to be in F1. And, he's having quiet races, he's getting on with it, he doesn't, get involved in incidents or anything like that. So he does have potential to do amazingly well and hopefully get to a top team. But I think in that aspect, his future's so uncertain, but it's so difficult because of how well he's performing and how many good results he's had. It's difficult to know where he might go because of all this backlash. Christian Horner, we mentioned earlier, criticising Tsunoda for something that he did and it wasn't really his fault. And Gasly may not want to be back in that environment. So I really hope he does find a good drive because he will keep performing at his best at AlphaTauri, but he obviously doesn't want to stay there forever. So I do hope we see him in some sort of top team in the near future.
Topher, where do you see him going in the future? Can you see him moving away from AlphaTauri, or do you almost feel he's doomed to stay there until he ends what could be a short career if he opts for that?
He's got one more year on his contract now with AlphaTauri. He'll be staying there into 2022. And I fully believe that will be his last season with that particular team. Whether he goes off to Red Bull in 23 or flies a nest and goes somewhere else, I don't know. But I think it might actually be quite good for his career if he does actually fly the nest. As we all know what happened last time he went to Red Bull. I don't need to go into too much detail about that. But I feel so that if he did go back to Red Bull, it wouldn't be the same as last time. I think he probably would perform a bit better up against Verstappen. But I think he's probably got more chance of sustaining a longer career if he moves on from the Red Bull family and goes somewhere else. There was a chance of him going to Alpine for next season. That was one that was making the silly season rumours at the time. That's not going to happen now. They've got Esteban Ocon in for a couple more years. And when Alonso eventually retires again, they'll probably bring up Oscar Piastri or someone like that. But where Gasly could end up in the future, I honestly could not tell you. I mean, maybe he could go the same route as Carlos Sainz, like maybe end up a Ferrari one day. Maybe Mercedes could be interested in his services somewhere, or maybe he could join a back marketing with Williams. I really don't know. There's so many different permutations when it comes to Pierre Gasly, but one thing that I am certain of, he's too good to not be in Formula One, in my opinion. He's already a race winner, as we saw in Monza last season. And that win, I think, was probably one of the most popular wins we've ever seen in Formula One. Not just because we had the underdog story of a first-time winner in a backmarker car. We had this whole history with Pierre Gasly, the whole debacle going on with Red Bull, being promoted, being demoted, also losing his close friend Antoine Hubert as well at the time. There was a lot going on with Pierre Gasly at the time, and that win was one that was much needed, not just as a feel-good story, but also just for him to know just how good he can be within the world of Formula One. And now that he's got the win under his belt, now he's effectively got the line of command in some ways within AlphaTauri. Like, not that he's bossing his mechanics around or anything, but it's almost as if that car is being built around him and he's making it work the best that he can. and he's now showing just how good he is. I don't think that he should leave Formula One anytime soon, whether it be with AlphaTauri or Red Bull or Ferrari or Mercedes or Haas, I don't know, or whoever. I think he should be in for a long Formula One career.
If I can just add to what Topher said regarding Pierre developing the AlphaTauri, what we need to remember about the AlphaTauri is that they use essentially Red Bull parts, but only some of them, because the regulations only allow them to use some of them. And that will mean the AlphaTauri will always be a compromise, always, because it won't be developed as a concept as a whole. These F1 cars with the front wing and everything, it's all correlated together, how the car works, where the airflow flows from here to there. It will take a miracle within the design department at AlphaTauri for them to design a package based on existing Red Bull parts for it to be integrated better into their own package. That would be a miracle. Personally, and I know it's been speculated and it'll be difficult to get there, but I genuinely think Pierre has a chance to get to the front if he moves to Alpine. Because here's a team which has the backing of a major manufacturer. Okay, perhaps the management isn't the greatest at the moment. I think he can build the team around him. Of course, he's French, so from a marketing point of view, that's fantastic for the team as well. He's a race winner, so that'll go far. But they develop their own engines, their own chassis. They don't rely on anybody else for the design parts of the car. You know, they can integrate the engine how they want to. They don't really have to think about any customers, anything like that. So if Pierre was to move to Alpine, in a year or 2 years' time or whatever, I feel like he could really make the package work as well. Perhaps there could be a bit of friction with Ocon because he's, also a race winner of the same nationality. That could happen. You never know. But he'd definitely be much more of initial help than the junior drivers Alpine currently has, because they need a season or two, to get up to speed how it works in Formula One, because it's a very different game in terms of car development and so forth. But he could move to different avenues, perhaps Ferrari, Mercedes, but Alpine, I really think that's the way for him. I really think if he needs to go to a team to boost his career, that should be the team he goes to.
I think I'm going to make this the question of the day to our viewers. What do you think is the future of Pierre Gasly? Do you think he's going off to Alpine, or do you think he's going to stay with AlphaTauri, perhaps even off to Williams, maybe in the future? As I made the point a couple of months ago, that in my opinion that would be the perfect destination for him, reasonably, when Nicholas Latifi leaves the team possibly in the future. So there you go. Moving away from AlphaTauri, that's going to be the final AlphaTauri point of the day. Fight for third in the Constructors' Championship has continued, with Ferrari now leading McLaren by 13 points. The Scuderia jumped ahead of them after the Mexico City Grand Prix. Merisse, Ferrari look to be now the third fastest team. They look to be the more confident between them and McLaren. Do you think that they can stay ahead in the coming races, or do you think there's more to come from Norris and Ricciardo?
Well, I think it's dependent on both of the drivers being up there, because I think whenever we see Ferrari have a good race at, they're at a track where their car is better suited, they always have both drivers up there. Whereas I think when you see McLaren have a good track that's suited to them, it's normally only one of the drivers, more noticeably Norris, who, makes the most of that situation, or, like we saw in Russia, he made the most of those conditions. So I think it is going to be a case of who can get both drivers up there on the coming tracks we have, because I think Ferrari and McLaren have both had success at Brazil. Carlos Sainz got a podium with McLaren there a couple of years ago. So I think it's really dependent on them making sure that they can maximise everything and take every single opportunity. Because as we saw, in the race yesterday, both Ferrari cars were up there, and, Ricciardo bottled it. He had that incident at turn 1 with Bottas, and then Norris was able to fight from the back up and get a point. So there again, you can see Norris making the most of a bad day, and both Ferrari drivers, getting points when they needed to, and they maximised. And I think, in a way, in my mind, it's down to Ricciardo, because he's the one, I think, out of those 4 drivers who struggled the most. So I think if he can have a really good few races, that may make the difference in McLaren being able to beat Ferrari. But it's so incredibly close, and we have no idea or incidents could happen, retirements, anything like that. But I know it's going to be an amazing battle, and it's crazy to think that McLaren and Ferrari are the two teams fighting for this third place, because we know them as the two greats of Formula One, and it's so nice that they're now battling for a good place in the championship again. So I think whichever one wins, it'll be well deserved because they've both done amazingly and they've got great lineups. But I guess we'll just have to wait and see.
If I could just add to that, Will, I'm going to make a bit of a statement here, and we'll see if people agree with me or not. But I think McLaren are in trouble because we've got only a couple races left. If we can think about, we've got 2 unknown tracks, and for those I will not speak for because we don't know what's going to happen there. But if we think about Brazil and Abu Dhabi, they're actually, in terms of the straights and in terms of the twisty sections, they're a little bit similar. Abu Dhabi has slightly longer straights, but they have quite tight sections, and the McLaren is not a good car for slow corners at all. The Ferrari has the advantage. We saw that in Monaco earlier in the year, and from Hungary onwards, McLaren has made no developments to that car. No larger developments, of course. They're still bringing developments from previous races, stuff they have, but nothing new is being designed because of all the focus for 2022, of course. But and we saw this in Mexico, when it comes to slower stuff, the tighter stuff, when it's less about aero but more about mechanical grip, the McLaren is far less suited to that than the Ferrari is. The Ferrari works much better through the slow stuff, aerodynamically, when some of the load is taken off it. And it seems to work. It's partly because the McLaren has, and we saw this at Monza because it worked very well, it's a relatively low drag concept, which seems to work on the tracks which are low drag. And we could see that part of the reason, or part of the effect of this, was that the McLaren was quite fast on the straight at Mexico, but through the twisty stuff, that's when Bottas would, for example, stick with Ricciardo. So I just, with the tracks that we have left, I really would be surprised if McLaren can pull something out of the bag here. I don't think the car is suited at all to the upcoming tracks.
Actually, to my own point that I was making, I've just had a thought that, McLaren got that 1-2 in Monza, but that was never a given, and Norris could have won in Russia, but I think even regardless of that 1-2, Ferrari is still ahead of them. So surely if, Ferrari haven't they've come close a couple of times with, Leclerc and Baku, but they haven't got that 1-2. They haven't got that massive haul of points, and McLaren have. So surely because of that, you'd think McLaren would be ahead. But the fact that Ferrari have still managed to get that many points and be ahead of them, I think is perhaps a sign that McLaren haven't done as well the last few races, and they haven't got that momentum that they can carry forward to get more points.
At the end of the day, what it comes down to is consistency within Formula One. You can have strong results here or there, but if you are consistently scoring points across the course of the season, you are going to do well. And that's exactly what Ferrari have done. You can argue that McLaren have been the stronger package at most of the events, but then they've had some races where they've been really off the pace. They've hardly scored any points, while Ferrari has been picking up a 5th place finish, a 6th place finish, a 7th place finish. Excuse me. And that has ultimately paid off in the championship as it stands with 4 rounds to go. Ferrari ahead of McLaren by, 33.5 points, I think it was. That's just by Ferrari consistently scoring points. I think they've only had maybe 4 occasions where one of their cars hasn't scored any points. But they've always been there within the top 7, top 8 picking up points. Whereas McLaren, sure, they've had a lot of podiums and they picked up a 1-2 in Monza, but then they've also had a lot more occasions than Ferrari where they've been outside of the top 10 for one reason or another. So the key here between those two is consistency. Who is consistently scoring more times than the other? And, well, that's Ferrari, and it now shows in the standings. They've got a bit more of an advantage over McLaren, and I'd say that's well-deserved.
I mean, history has shown us that McLaren and Ferrari are age-old enemies. And one of the main reasons why they are such brilliant teams is their designers. Now, on this day, a few years ago, I'm not going to tell you the exact year, and you'll see why, Adrian Newey decided that he wasn't going to turn up to Williams. He was instead going to head off to McLaren to negotiate a contract with them, which eventually resulted in 2 World Championships in 1998 and 1999. My question to you guys today is: what year did Newey sign his contract with McLaren and then move to the working base team a year later? Maciej, if we start with you, and Merisse, and then Topher.
Oh, so the question is, what year did Newey move to McLaren, correct?
What year did he sign a contract with them? That's where I'm getting at it.
He signed a contract. If I get this wrong, I'm going to be really embarrassed because I've read his book. I believe it was 1996, because he didn't design anything for the 1997 car, but the design that he did design in 1996 was used in 1997, but he got put on gardening leave. Am I correct?
Well, the other two have got to answer first. Merisse?
As usual, I have no idea because I have no clue about car design or anything, so I'm glad Maciej went first because I probably would have been like 1980 because I have no clue. So I'm going to steal his idea and go 1 year before and say 95.
And Topher.
Now, annoyingly, everything that Maciej said is absolutely correct. But I was thinking, he said 96, so just to be different, I'd say 1995. Like, he signed the contract earlier, then moved later. But then Merisse has gone and said 1995, so... I like to try and give different answers to people, just try and keep it interesting, but that's my top 2 answers gone. So I think I'm going to stick with what I would have originally said earlier. He joined McLaren for 1997, but I think he would have signed the contract in 1996.
Merisse, I'm sorry to say, but you've been beaten once again by the 2 other panelists, Maciej and Topher. You're correct. It was 1996, and just a bit of a fact here. Just a bit of a fact here. 9 years to the day later, he actually joined Red Bull Racing as their chief technical officer. The deal was signed in 2005, but ultimately he would join in 2006, and realistically, 15 years later, he's just won another Mexican Grand Prix and could go on to win yet another World Championship. The most successful man in Formula One history. Not Schumacher, not Hamilton. It is in fact Adrian Newey.
Get that man a knighthood.
In all honesty, Topher, I completely agree with you there for once. I think that's the first time we've agreed on something in quite a while.
It makes a nice change, doesn't it?
Can I ask a follow-up question?
What?
Does anybody know the reason why he left for McLaren?
Because he wanted joint ownership of the Williams team, I believe, something along those lines. He wanted some form of stake.
He wanted more responsibility, like he wanted a higher role within Williams or something.
That was also partly the reason, but the final blow, as it was for it, was actually the signing of Jacques Villeneuve, because it was agreed that only if he was within a second of, I think it was Damon Hill's time when they were testing, would he be signed. But it was actually, I think, 1.5 or 2 seconds, and he was signed on the spot. And Adrian had it within his contract that he would be consulted on matters such as driver selection. And basically, Patrick Head and Frank Williams signed him on the spot, Jacques Villeneuve, and Adrian thought that was enough, and that was the final straw, and he moved to McLaren after that.
I wonder how that move turned out for him.
Both ended up world champions, so moving back to modern Formula One then. Moving over to Aston Martin, currently 7th in the championship. Sebastian Vettel ended up scoring quite a good points haul for the team, ended up in 7th place at the end of the day. Topher, after quite a difficult year for Aston Martin compared to last year. Last year they ended the season in 4th. This year they'll be lucky to even challenge for 6th. Looks quite unlikely at this point. But Vettel, P7, the team isn't in the best position at the minute. Ultimately, a good day at work.
Yeah, I mean, you can't really say this was a bad day in the office for Sebastian Vettel. I think a 7th place for anyone, like except if you Red Bull and Mercedes, but a 7th place for anyone, that's a good day in the office for a Formula One driver. And it was a bit of a shame for the team that Lance Stroll couldn't follow that up. He ended up finishing 2 laps down in a P14, I believe it was. But Aston Martin, they don't need to be getting any sort of big results right now. They're still finding their way back into Formula One again. They're still trying to get themselves re-established within the world of Formula One and build themselves up to be a championship winning team however many years down the line. And if I remember correctly, Will, I think you said towards the start of the season that Aston Martin will be championship contenders within the next year or two. Like, am I correct on that one?
Yes, you are indeed correct on that.
I mean, I don't contest that Aston Martin could end up challenging for titles in the future, but not that far down the line. I think they need a few years to, as I said, get themselves re-established back into Formula One again, build themselves up, get that experience for their drivers and for their mechanics, and then challenge higher up the order further on down the line. And yeah, I mean, I don't think that their Mexico City Grand Prix was anything special for them. It wasn't anything for them to write home about, but a 7th place finish for Vettel, 6 points on the boards. You can't complain too much, can you?
Well, considering what team you manage in the Retro Racers Managers League, Topher, I thought you'd be a bit more supportive of Aston Martin than that.
Well, you know, I do have a lot of love for the Jordan family within the world of Formula One. Back when I was growing up watching Formula One, I was a big fan of Heinz-Harald Frentzen back in 1999, taking the challenge to the likes of Michael Schumacher and Mika Hakkinen and all that. But yeah, like I think that family tree's become so diluted now. I don't really think it's Jordan anymore, if I'm completely honest with you.
I don't think you're the only one there, but moving on down the order to P8, Merisse. Kimi Räikkönen scored 4 points for the Alfa Romeo squad, and it was quite quiet for Räikkönen all the race. You didn't really see him much other than a small squabble with Fernando Alonso and Sebastian Vettel, almost a bit of a train going on there. But Alfa Romeo scoring some points. Obviously, I doubt it will be enough to close the gap properly down to Williams by the end of the season, but it's Alfa Romeo are just taking what they can get at the minute, and Raikkonen, I assume, is just happy to enjoy the races he's got left in Formula One.
Yeah, I completely agree. He had a good race, I think. There's obviously not much more he can do with that Alfa Romeo, and I think that was the best result he could have got. But at the end of the day, even if I think he finished 15th, but he had a fun race for himself, I think he'd be happy, considering obviously he's leaving at the end of this year. So for him to score points, when he had, the likes of Norris, Ricciardo, people like that behind him, I think is still really impressive and, shows he's still got that skill as a driver. And also on the point that the fact that it was Vettel, Raikkonen and Alonso all together in the top 10, I think that just brings me some sort of happiness and reminds me of, the good old days. Because we obviously won't be seeing that anymore after this year. But I think he had, solid race, qualified, P12, before obviously the penalties for other drivers. But solid race, good points for the team. Yeah, I think he should be proud with that.
And Maciej, finishing off a trio of World Championship drivers, Fernando Alonso scored 2 points, which allowed Alpine to equal AlphaTauri in the Constructors' Championship after Pierre Gasly's 4th place. It's quite a good result for Alpine, but maybe not enough to hang on to that 5th place.
No, I don't think it is, Will. They're struggling a bit, aren't they, Alpine? It's just something's not quite right. I mean, during the US Grand Prix, they had that embarrassing double DNF, didn't they? Especially in I think Fernando's wing rear wing actually delaminated, which is, it's a bit strange. You don't hear of that's more of a production problem than a design or anything like that. So you don't hear that very often. It's a bit surprising, the recent problems they've had, and it just seems like the other packages have been getting better in terms of Aston Martin and Alfa Romeo. I'm not sure if they're developing the car anymore, Aston Martin and Alfa Romeo, because they should be focusing on 2022. But it just seems that they're just struggling to find ultimately pace and qualifying with the car. In the races, Fernando has been able to hold his own. I mean, I quite carefully tracked the progress of Lando Norris in the McLaren compared to Fernando, and he wasn't really. It wasn't. Lando wasn't reeling him in, seconds per lap. It was quite slow. So I think the race pace of the Alpine isn't that poor. But whatever the problem is in qualifying, they need to sort out quite quickly because they're going to really struggle to hold on. I mean, the bright side they can see from this is that Alonso and Ocon are quite equal normally in terms of qualifying. Here, Ocon was a little bit unlucky. He was caught up in that first lap incident, wasn't he? At the start of the race, and he dropped back. I think he had a little bit of bargeboard damage as well, which didn't help him. But if we look at the other side of the camp with AlphaTauri, Tsunoda hasn't really been that convincing, hasn't he, in terms of point scoring? It's really all down to Gasly to see if they can snatch that 5th place off Alpine. Will they do it? I think it's quite likely, unless Pierre needs to take on new power units for the next 2 races. I really don't see how they're going to lose this. But, a couple of DNFs and Alpine, just bring it in the points, they can still do it. But, something's not quite clicking at Alpine. 2022 might see an improvement, but for a team which has the only power unit, or are running their power unit, the only team that have the Renault power unit, they can kind of package the car how they like. They don't really need to consult with anybody. They definitely don't need to focus on anyone else. So they should, all the focus should be going towards the team. And whether it's a management problem, because Alpine has that unique management structure compared to other teams, they don't really have one man in charge. Whether that's the problem, or if there needs to be a design shake-up to really bring, some new ideas into it, I'm not really sure. But, it's ultimately the drivers aren't at fault. They have 2 quality drivers. It's down to the car, in my opinion.
Just before we wrap up the show, I just want to take a look ahead to Brazil, which is coming up this week. In fact, the Sao Paulo Grand Prix, which they've renamed the race to. I believe it was something to do with the fact that Rio was looking to join the calendar towards the end of last year, but ultimately that didn't go ahead. So the Sao Paulo Grand Prix. If we start with Topher, then Merisse, and then finish up with Maciej, I just want to know who you think will claim pole position and then the top 3 at the end of the Grand Prix.
Pole position, Lewis Hamilton. Top 3, Max Verstappen, Sergio Perez, and Lando Norris. Top 3.
I think I'm going to go with pole position, Valtteri, and then the podium, Max, Lewis, and Carlos.
I think pole position will be Max Verstappen, and the top 3 I think will be Max Verstappen, Lewis Hamilton, and I'm going to go with Valtteri Bottas.
Well, there we go. Thank you very much to Maciej, Merisse, and Topher for joining me for another episode of Maximum Downforce, the official Downforce Radio Formula 1 podcast. And thank you very much to all of you at home for listening. Remember to check out our social media at Downforce Radio on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, you name it, we're on it, as well as our website, downforceradio.uk, to take a look at all of the latest and greatest news articles, as well as the Downforce radio station. Thank you very much for listening. Hope you have a wonderful afternoon, evening, morning, wherever you're listening. Remember to let us know your predictions as well for the Sao Paulo Grand Prix. Thank you very much for listening. Have a wonderful day. Goodbye.
Go, go, go!